said, you know, that was so good. If you want to just skip and go straight to lunch, we can do that. And probably there are people out here that would agree with you, but Danny might be mad because he invited me like a year ago and drove from Winston-Salem, so we probably better do something. But that was fantastic. Dave, thank you so much for, one, that lovely introduction you provided, and two, the wonderful worship leadership you've given this morning. Your choir is awesome. And I was so excited when I heard that my old friend, who I hadn't had a lot of contact with lately, had come to Chadbourne Baptist. And so I commend you on calling Dave, and I know that's a great, great match that you've made together, and it's good to be back with you, Dave. We go back many, many moons. So it's good to be together again. Kim, my wife, had hoped to be with me today, primarily because she wanted to see Ruth Ellen, because it had been so long since they had been together. Back in those, well, we've seen each other since then, but especially remember fondly those Richmond days a long time ago. But unfortunately, yesterday, Kim took ill, and some kind of stomach thing, and had a rough night last night. And so she just couldn't make the journey this morning. But she does send her regrets along with her greetings. I want to say thank you to my colleague and friend Danny Russell for the invitation to be with you today. Danny is one of the bright young ministers in our fellowship, and I first got to know Danny when he came to the First Baptist Church of Silva as associate up there in the mountains, and he did a fantastic job there. And then when I knew that you all had called him as your pastor, I knew that you'd been listening to the Lord and that this would be a good match, and I commend you for that. I said to Danny, have you gotten used to the difference in the terrain between Silva and Chadbourne? It's a little different, a little elevation change. But he said that he had really enjoyed being here in Columbus County, being with you all at Chadbourne Baptist, and that too I know is a wonderful match, and you have had and will continue to enjoy a very bright future in serving the Lord together in this place. If I don't say anything else today at all, I do need to say a word of thanks. Thank you for your partnership with Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, both here in North Carolina and around the world, as we are doing so much together in the name of Jesus. We are being the hands and feet of Christ, sharing the love of Christ in word and deed, both in our state and around the world. Together, we are supporting missionaries who work in some of the hard places in our world, some places where people have little access to the gospel of Jesus, where it's very difficult, where they have very little access to Christian resources, and you're helping them to come to know the Lord in that way. We thank you because you're helping to train the next generation of church leaders, folks like Danny Russell and many, many others, so that churches just like yours can have the pastors and ministers that they need to be able to be faithful and effective heralds of the gospel of Christ in their communities and around the world. Thank you for the ways that we are working together to be on mission on college campuses around our state. For young people are one of our great unreached people groups in our time. And even though there may not be huge populations that reside in Columbus County, they are in other parts of our state, and you are reaching them as we're working on that together. Thank you for the ways that we are reaching other folks who are coming to our state, newcomers, people who may look a little different from us and speak different languages, but we are working together to share the gospel of Jesus with them in many ways. I could go on and on and on, and there's not time this morning, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your partnership. Chadbourne Baptist has been a part of Cooperative Baptist Fellowship since its early days here in our state. You've been one of our great long-term partner churches, and we're thankful for that. I think about all the pastors through the years that you've had who have been active in our fellowship, who are my personal friends, and kind of counting backwards, I think of Sean Roberts, who is now up in Virginia, and before that, Rob and Nikki Norman, who were down a little bit further east on the coast, and before that, C.F. McDowell, an old dear friend of mine, and I know there are many, many others, but do want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you do to support churches like yours and ministries that you can be proud of in our state and beyond. Now this morning, for our scripture text, I'd like to direct your attention to the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, we're going to talk a little more about that in a minute, and I'm going to repeat this a little bit as well, but I want to start out by just focusing in on a few verses here in the 6th chapter. We're going to look first at verses 10 through 12, and then skip on down to verses 20 through 25. I invite you to read along in your own copy of the Scriptures. Moses is speaking here for the Lord, and he says, "Now when the Lord your God has brought you into the land that he swore to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you a land with fine, large cities that you did not build, houses filled with all sorts of goods you did not fill, hewn cisterns that you did not hew, vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. And when you have eaten your fill, take care that you do not forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." And when your children ask you in time to come, what is the meaning of the decrees and the statutes and the ordinances that the Lord our God has commanded you, then you shall say to your children, "We were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt. But the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. The Lord displayed before our eyes great and awesome signs and wonders against Egypt, against Pharaoh and all his household. He brought us out from there in order to bring us in, to give us this land that he promised to our ancestors. Then the Lord commanded us to observe all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our lasting good, so as to keep us alive, as is now the case. If we diligently observe this entire commandment before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us, we will be in the right." Thanks be to God, for this is holy word. You pray with me. Oh Lord, speak to us now, just as you have spoken to us in creation, just as you have spoken to us first and foremost in Jesus Christ, just as you have spoken to us through your written word. Now speak to us as your word is proclaimed, that we might hear it in such a way that touches us and moves us and then equips us to be your presence in the world. In the name of the living word, Jesus the Christ, we pray. Amen. One thing that, a little bit of bio that Dave shared with you does not tell you, is that I actually grew up in a family that was dominated by a family business. My father was in the service station business. And he ran several different service stations, but the one I remember the most was one that was on East Independence Boulevard. It's right here on Highway 74, just a couple hundred miles up the road, you might want to say, on the east side of Charlotte. I grew up pumping gas and changing oil and fixing flat tires and all that kind of stuff. It was actually, Danny, wonderful preparation for ministry. I mean, because if you think about it, what is the church called to be if not a service station to the world? Well, in any event, my mom and dad went into debt when they were young adults to try to go into this business. And they worked very hard in that business for about 30 years, until there reached a moment in time when my dad felt it was time for him to retire. And that raised the question that eventually confronts all business owners, and that is, who will succeed me in this business? And usually with small family businesses like ours, it's somebody else in the family who will take it over. But that really wasn't an option for us, because you see, had already started in the ministry, and my sister had her own career that she was into and wasn't interested in that. And so my dad ended up having to sell that business to someone outside the family. And it didn't take very long before that business began to look very different from the one my dad had led for so long. And ultimately, the people who bought it from him went out of business. You know, leadership succession is one of the chief difficulties that faces business owners, especially small family businesses. There are too many horror stories of succeeding generations taking the business of the founders, and then due to lack of maturity or ability or a false understanding of the history of the organization, kind of end up just running it into the ground. And even if it can survive the second generation, it rarely survives the third, because the initial vision and drive have been lost, and there's nobody around anymore who can remember the initial vision and the sacrifices of those earlier days. Nobody left who can tell the story of when it began and how it moved forward to where it is today, and therefore where it can and should go into the future. Well, this story, where a person or family or an organization or a nation or even a church comes from, including the people and the events who are part of that story, is more than simply a recounting of the past. A better word is heritage. Heritage involves the past, but it's much more. Heritage embraces all of the people and places and events and cherished objects of the past that have come together to create the present we now enjoy and can launch us into the future. A church homecoming like you're celebrating today is a good time to honor your heritage. The people and the places and the events, all of that part of the past that make you who you are today and can shape you into who you need to be into the future. Of course, even as we recognize this, it's also important to recognize that you cannot live in the past. You can, though, live out of your heritage. In fact, without an understanding and appreciation of your heritage, that story of the people, places, events, and forces that have shaped you, then you cannot fully and completely live satisfactorily in the present. Well, this Old Testament book of Deuteronomy served to transmit heritage to the Israelites a number of times in their history. Deuteronomy, as you may know, is the 5th book of the Bible, the final book of the Pentateuch, or the Torah, or the Law. Deuteronomy describes the events leading up to the transition period between the wilderness wanderings of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers into the conquest and settlement of the Promised Land described in Joshua and Judges. The word Deuteronomy literally means second law. And in this book, the law that God gave the Israelites to govern their relationship with Him and one another, beginning with the 10 Commandments, here it is restated again, a second time, to remind them of their heritage, so that they can live fully and faithfully in their present time as they prepare for their future in the Promised Land. Now, after he preaches a sermon in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, in which he restates the 10 Commandments that had been given by the Lord on Mount Sinai 40 years before, Moses then, here in chapter 6, summarizes the law with what came to be known as the Shema, a prayer that devout Jews would have recited 5 times a day. And Pastor Danny read that as part of our call to worship as we gathered together for worship just a little bit ago. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength. Many years later, Jesus himself would call it the greatest of all the commandments. And then, in the verses that follow, Moses gives the people both a warning and a command. The warning is found in verses 10 through 12. And simply stated, the warning is this: don't forget. Do not forget. He said, someday you'll be living in the land God promised your ancestors. You'll be the beneficiary of their faith and sacrifice and hard work and perseverance. He says you will inherit a land with large flourishing cities you did not build, and houses filled with all kind of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. He says, when all that happens, when you have all of this before you, when all of it is in your possession, don't forget. Don't forget who's responsible for all that. Remember that it was your ancestors working in cooperation with God who made it possible for you to enjoy the blessings you have today. Remember that you stand on the shoulders of giants. Remember and do not forget your heritage. That's the warning. The command is then found in verses 20 through 25. And in those verses, Moses, speaking on behalf of the Lord, preaches to the people, tell the story. Transmit your heritage to your children. Explain to them there's a reason for the rules you live by and the ceremonies you follow. Tell them how God delivered you from slavery in Egypt. And tell them that even today, God still delivers us from all kinds of bondage. Tell them how the Lord took care of our people in the past, providing for them in sometimes miraculous ways. And tell them that God continues to meet our needs, even today, as we continue to live in a covenant relationship with Him. Tell the story. Tell the story to your children. Tell it to anybody who will listen. Tell the story of God's love and care in the past so that we can then trust God to provide that same love and care today and, yes, even into the future. There's an old hymn that has us sing, "We've a story to tell the nations." That's so true. So I think about that story today. For the Chatburn Baptist Homecoming, I'm reminded that it's a story really with 3 chapters. To begin with, folks, our story is first and foremost a Christian story. It includes Peter, who denied the Lord but was given a second chance at service and became the rock on which the church was built. It includes Stephen, who was the first person to be killed for the Christian faith, but he certainly wasn't the last. It includes Paul, who moved from persecutor to proclaimer, the first and greatest missionary the church has ever seen, and the producer of much of our New Testament. It includes those women, the very first heralds of the resurrection, who were last at the cross and first at the tomb. It includes many, many more folks, but above all, it includes Jesus, the founder of our faith, the one whose life, death, and resurrection gives us life that is both abundant and eternal. Primary symbol of the Christian story is baptism. It vividly shows that we've been connected to Jesus in His death and resurrection. It brings our heritage into present experience, revealing that through Christ we have been saved from sin and death, but we have been saved for service and ministry and mission. Martin Luther, the great reformer, understood the importance of baptism as a testimony to and transmitter of heritage when he urged all Christians to remember your baptism and be thankful. Now, our story is not only Christian, but it's also Baptist. It includes folks like John Smith and Thomas Hovis, who insisted, along with others in Europe and America after them, that neither king nor pope has any business legislating spiritual matters. It includes Roger Williams, who broke with the established churches in the New World and insisted that everyone must be free to worship God according to the dictates of their conscience, even those that may not believe the way we do. It includes William Screven, who planted the first Baptist church in Charleston, in the South, in Charleston, South Carolina. And they emphasized organization, cooperation, and education. It includes Shubal Stearns and Daniel Marshall, who carried the first Great Awakening into the South around 50 years later, beginning with the Sandy Creek Baptist Church in Guilford County, North Carolina, emphasizing evangelism biblicism, and freedom. It includes folks like E.Y. Mullins, Herschel Hobbs, Lottie Moon, Martin Luther King Jr., Cecil Sherman, Keith Parks, Randall Lally, Daniel Vestal, Susie Painter, and countless other kinds of Baptists who honor our cherished heritage and principles. May we continue to offer an authentic Baptist witness in the 21st century. Like the Christian story, the primary symbol of our Baptist story is also that you are called to tell your children and to anyone God brings into this fellowship of Christians. It's the story that you are called to share in this community and in our world. Like the Israelites before us, you've inherited a church that you did not build, and enjoy the blessings of the sacrifice, devotion, and faithfulness of all the generations who've gone on before you. You too stand on the shoulders of giants. The words of Moses in the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy apply just as much to us as they did to those who were about to enter the promised land, and to those earliest Christians, and to those first Baptists, and to the founders of this church, and to every generation of the people of God. And it is this: don't forget your heritage. Tell the story to your children and to everyone who will listen. One of the most influential people in my life when I was growing up was Isabel P. Graham, my great Aunt Belle. Aunt Belle never married, but she worked in the business world long before many women did that. She was my grandmother's sister who came to live with my grandmother when my grandfather died, and my father was only 6 years old at the time. It was a very, very difficult time for that family. Aunt Belle not only helped rear him, as she also went out in the world and made money for the family, but later she also helped to rear my sister and me, even though we had the blessing of 2 parents. Aunt Belle was wise both in the ways of the world and in the ways of God. She dispensed a good deal of good advice and wisdom to me down through the years, but perhaps the greatest wisdom she ever passed on to me was to introduce me to my ancestors, most of which I never had the opportunity to meet personally. Her introduction to them was the next best thing. On several occasions, Aunt Belle would say to me, "Sugarfoot," that's what she called me. I hate to say it, it's kind of embarrassing, but she did. She said, "Sugarfoot, you are a Graham. You come from good stock. Always remember who you are." Dear church family, you come from good stock. Christian, Baptist, Chadburn Baptist. You stand on the shoulders of giants. Honor your heritage. Don't forget. Tell the story. Always remember who you are. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you that your work in the world did not start with us and does not end with us, but we are links in a greater chain. With thanksgiving for all that has come before us, prepare us for what is still to come, that we might be your faithful, effective disciples, serving you from Chadburn to the ends of the earth. In the name of Jesus, and with thanksgiving for all who made today possible, we pray.